Mm-mm. Mm-mm. Oh, cool. I got that going on now. Good evening, everybody. I'm Christopher Balzano. Welcome to Tripping on Legends. This is one of our live shows, so as you know, those do not have official numbers. So we're just going with the title of tonight's discussion, which is The Ghostly Audience. And I'll get into why I why I chose that as a topic. It kind of just came to me as I was preparing some stuff this week, or as I was doing some work this week. Happy National Ghost Hunters Day. I was corrected in several of my posts when I called it International Ghost Hunting Day, although I'm sure there are people not in this country who are who are celebrating tonight by going to find their ghost. And a lot of people asked me if I was going to be doing something for it. I almost went to Oak Ridge Cemetery, and I decided against it. But I will, I gotta change the camera there to get that stuff out of the camera shot. I do have the candle going tonight, as well as doing a little smudging tonight. So I'm hoping that this show has less technical difficulties than episode 60 did. But I was, there were several of them, and I struggle with the idea. How are we doing today, Mark? I struggle with the idea of ghost hunting in general. Forget about the actual use of the word ghost hunting, but I understand the spirit of it, which is a night of investigating or celebrating investigating. Because I am so changed or shifted from that even now I'm like, okay, but I don't want to go too techie on things, or be in a situation where I'm out there in the field. I'm just sharing the phone number with the chat room. If you are listening to this post, whether you're listening to one of the premiere episodes or whether you're listening to it on podcast, follow the website, follow especially the Facebook, follow the Facebooks that you can actually get when we are going to be doing these live shows, because there are a lot of interesting things that I can't necessarily get to, especially when I'm doing the show alone, that are going on in the chat room. And so anyone who wants to tonight call in because you want to share a thought on what I'm saying, or just maybe even your experience with trying to please the audience. The number here is 813-418-6822. Remember when you remembered phone numbers? I used to be able to rattle off 17 people that I either knew or I wanted to know, because I wasn't popular. And now I'm every time I have to go 813. I can give my actual phone number, but I had that before cell phones. Anyway, back to what I'm talking about. If you are a fan of the show, the first few minutes is always rambling while we kind of get some business done. I hope that people are out there investigating. I hope that they're doing an interesting job with it. The more that I have been not investigating, the more that I find I don't want to look at evidence, or I don't want to experience evidence the same way. I want to experience, and so, and I think a great example of that is Arbuckle Bridge, where there's nothing that I feel that can tell me that I didn't experience something profound there, but we presented the evidence to people to look at, and it very clearly something that we thought was impactful was not. It was Someone actually did a whole video where they, and then took it down, which I don't get. A whole video where they like actually used Photoshop to show like where the lights were and where they reflected from and how it wasn't what we thought it was, which is fine because we weren't putting it out there and stuff. But the last evidence that I really gathered would probably be at the Okeechobee Library, because they asked me to come in and see, because they were having experiences. They thought the place might be haunted. And I said, well, I don't really do that, but I'll do it for you because, we're friends. And so I went in and I got about 4 hours worth of evidence. And I just found it so tedious and uninspiring to go through it. But that doesn't mean that other people who enjoy doing that, they're doing anything wrong. I found it was so not interesting. And I did get some stuff, and, I'll be sharing it out when I go to that library. But it was, and it's kind of, I guess, to some degree, is part of what we're talking about tonight, is this idea of, if you are, and in any way associated with the paranormal, you are automatically assumed, back in the day it used to be, you were automatically assumed to be a ghost buster. So people would use that kind of terminology. And then it became, you are a ghost hunter. And they always use that term, ghost hunter. And you want to go, oh, I'm a paranormal investigator. And they don't necessarily make that distinction, but it definitely molds, or at least influences, what they expect to hear at an event. What I'm going to do just really quickly, I'm going to share this all on the Tripping on Legends website, is I'm going to just very, very quickly hit some of the places that I'm going to be at. And I'm going to do this at the beginning because I started to do it a little bit on the last episode and then totally forgot some things. So first week, October is all good. Second week, on the 7th, I'm going to be in Naples. So if you're in the Naples area. And then I'm going to be on the 9th, it's a Wednesday, I'm going to be in Melbourne. And that's really interesting because I'm doing a paranormal panel where people are going to be talking about, I don't know, there's anything from UFOs to, I think there's a skunk ape expert going to be on. I think she was still finalizing this stuff, which is cool because if there are less people, that means I talk more. Then that Saturday, so Saturday the 12th, is going to be a mega, I'm going to shut this off because I keep seeing flashes from the Ohio State game. It's going to be a mega weekend. So it's one of those things where I am going to be looking to definitely do a legend trip that night, because during the day, I'm going to be, this is the 12th, I'm going to be in Gainesville, and then I'm going to be in Alachua. So I'm doing back-to-back events, staying overnight, hence the legend trip in the Gainesville area. So I got to find something. So if you know something in Gainesville that's not the University of Florida, something in that area. Then the next day, I'm doing another event in Gainesville, and then I'm doing something in Hawthorne, Florida, which I guess is right near there. The libraries there kind of got together and pulled their money so that I could stay overnight. Then the next Saturday, I'm going to be in Immokalee. So once again, Lee County, Collier County area. Then the 23rd, I'm going to be in Jupiter, Florida. The 24th, I'm going to be in Lake Park, Florida. The 25th, now this is where it gets kind of cool, I'm going to be in Mount Dora and then Leesburg. So another one of those double sessions. And I am definitely staying overnight that night because Mount Dora and Leesburg, that's where I really want to get into that Lady Lake, that haunted road, and maybe a few other things, because that is the Ocala area. So that's really the focus of my next book. And then fly down to Okeechobee on the 26th. Then I'm at Eastlake on the 27th, and I'm going to get to talking about that one a little bit more later. Then Naples again on the 30th, Palmetto on the 31st, which is going to kind of be another topic tonight that I'm going to talk about. And then that weekend, so that's Saturday, November 2nd. I'm not sure which moment I'm going to get there, but I wanted to bring this up because this is probably one of the big ones, and this is going to be the one that people can really sink their teeth into. This is in Tampa, not Orlando this year. It's Tampa. It's an event called Spooky Empire. And it is a horror convention and a tattoo convention. And I guess it is huge. From all that I've been told, it is the biggest convention, or one of the biggest conventions, especially horror conventions, in this area every single year. And everyone was talking about it. And everyone was asking me if I was going to go, and I had never heard of it. And then Ed Ashbury, am I pronouncing that right? Yeah, Ed Ashbury. Asked me if I was going, and I was like, probably not. I got a lot going on in October. I've got a kind of kid situation's kind of weird. And he said, no, you have to go to this. And he immediately set me up with the organizer of what's called the creators track or the writers track, which is kind of a small part of this bigger horror convention. And there are going to be a ton of amazing people who are going to be speaking at it. I believe Ed is going to be there with his Ouija boards, which are amazing. If you followed us when we did the Southwest Paranormal Conference last January, and I shot out some of those pictures, his Ouija boards are amazing. I think he's going to be there, but if not, we still have a ton of people. Me, now it's funny because, I was always taught to be low-hanging fruit, and so I've volunteered for everything. So I'm actually going to be moderating some panels, so I'm kind of freaked out about that. But if you follow the show, Mark Muncie's going to be there. Dr. Brandy Stark is going to be there. Dave Gassan's going to be there. All of these people who we've kind of talked about in our research, and I'm probably forgetting a whole bunch of other people who are going to be there. It's going to be a really amazing weekend. And if anything, and this has been the selling point for my son, Twisted Sister is supposed to be reuniting, I believe. And they're going to be there this weekend, playing out, and then kind of hanging out in the horror show convention. But Elvira's going to be there. The Raimis are going to be there, and I guess they never do conferences together. So it's going to be a really cool thing. I'm going to be there at least Saturday and Sunday, and we might go up and at least hit the event on Saturday, Friday. But with all the things that I just said, I am revisiting, I think, three of the places I've been to before. Last year, I believe the event was called, Florida's Haunted Legends or something along those lines, the Haunted Legends of Florida. This year's event is called Haunted Hometowns. And the idea that I was going with was this, obviously, if you follow me at all, my obsession with the Bridgewater Triangle and my work there and my work with Freetown. And then my work with in our last episode, we talked about Arcadia. And we have Brooksville is a really good example, or these places that are around the Ocala Forest, Astor, obviously one of my favorites. There is a certain complexion, I think is the word we usually use, that these communities take on because of the paranormal that is active there, right? So we have this idea that, which is this, I guess, the spirit of tripping on legends itself. You can get to know what a place is like, the personality of a place, by exploring the paranormal. If you want to know the history of any town you go to, if they've got a ghost walk, that's the best way to find out the history of the place, right? You can go into the historical community, but that's books. Most people don't like that. But this idea that you can know places by the ghost stories that they tell and the legends that are kind of make up their town. And so that was the real drive of what I was doing. Now, two of the events, one of which is the one that's in Eastlake, which I believe is near Tampa because it's in Pinellas County. And then the Palmetto one. So this East Lake event said, you have to talk about Ybor City and you have to talk about this. And she actually gave me things that she specifically wanted me to talk about. The idea being that people want the ghost stories of the places that are near them, And I was like, well, I'm not really telling ghost stories. I'm telling the haunted legends. Is there a difference between those things? And then the Palmetto event, which was maybe the hardest of them to get. And I'm actually doing that on Halloween Eve. So on Halloween, I'm going to be in Palmetto. And she very specifically was saying to me, is it going to be spooky? It needs to be spooky. That's why we agreed to do it at this time. That's why, is it going to be spooky? We want to be scared. We want to make sure that people leave and they're scared. And I like that idea. I like the idea of, especially on Halloween, being that really creepy night, being the night where that stuff's the most acceptable. And, if you believe the idea that that's the night where the veil is thinnest and we can communicate with the dead more easily and all those great things that make up haunted Halloween legends. For all of that, as I'm doing my lineup, I realized that it's not necessarily the point of what I do to make everything scary, right? A ghost story is scary, but does it need to be, right? Because here's the first thing I'll say. If you ask me my favorite ghost movies, my favorite ghost movie of all time is Field of Dreams. And people can comment on what their favorite ghost movie is. Not horror movie, but ghost movie. My second is probably Frighteners, which I just watched with the kids last weekend, shifting. Once again, you could argue that that's more of a comedy because my kids weren't freaked out. My kids weren't scared by it at all. Although it's got freaky, scary elements to it. And then Poltergeist, which we've done an episode on that, and that's pretty damn scary. Why do ghost stories have to be scary? Do they have to be, right? So there's a certain pressure, and this is, I think, the number one issue with this is there's a certain pressure, especially if you've been to these locations, to amp up the creepy factor and to amp up the scared, which I think to some people means that they exaggerate things that have happened or that they try to put some significance on things that are not significant to make it so that it is scary. The Ghost of Miss Mirror, I love that movie, and I really don't, if I remember correctly, that's not really scary, right? I mean, it's creepy in parts, but I have a hard time distinguishing between the TV show and the and the movie of that. So people tend to exaggerate things that have happened or accentuate moments. And I'll give you a few examples. One example is the mini lights, right? So the mini lights is one of my favorite Florida legends, and if you haven't listened to that episode or done any research on that, like, you have to hit it because it is so complex. It was probably my favorite chapter to write in the book, especially considering that I think it's in Mark Muncie's new book, and as I'm typing things out, he's doing the edits on his, and I'm like, but did you talk about this, or how about this, or how about this? And we've both approached it from some different angles, and so if you've never listened to the episode or watched any of the live videos, we went to 3 different locations that potentially could have been where this ghostly legend comes from. And so it's basically almost like these either ghost lights or even like little troll type things that attack people in these areas. When we went there, except for at one moment, which Natalie didn't know about at the time, there was no activity whatsoever. We went there, we reviewed stuff afterwards, didn't get anything. You know, there was a very tense moment with alligators, which, you know, is par for the course, but nothing happened, right? And more importantly, nothing has ever been documented. And yet it's a really amazing legend. But how do you tell that legend if people are looking for spooky? It tells us about who we are. It tells us about gentrification and this idea of pulling out old Florida to make way for new Florida, and all these really interesting ideas, and you know, taps into potential abductions and connections to the Ringling Brothers and all these other things. But there's no spooky element to it, and yet it's a really good story. So do you include that in a presentation of ghost stories, right? In this haunted hometowns, is it Scooby? I was going to say Scooby enough. Is it scary enough for what the audience wants? Because if the audience is looking to be freaked out, first of all, I don't know how you get freaked out in a library, unless it's a haunted library, and that's the point of it. But if you're just listening to someone tell these stories, you know, it's not like you're out in the field. It's not like it's a dark and stormy night. All those kinds of things. You know, is that story scary enough? And what happens is that when I tell that story, I feel compelled to talk about the dark figure that was stalking us through one of the locations. And this dark figure, who I haven't talked too much about on air about it. This dark figure that was jumping through the trees, tracking us, tracing us through one of the locations is such a small part of what happened. And yet, there you go. Like, that's what people want to hear, right? People want to hear about that dark figure who was following us and what that might be and what happened and did we react. And the fact of the matter is, it was so early on in our history that I didn't want to say anything because I didn't want to freak Natalie out, right? So essentially it was like, I ignored it, and so nothing really happened. There's a pressure to tell that story with that element to it, even though it's really not that creepy. Brooksville would be another really good example of a place where we went that you can tell that story and you can make it scary, but the legend trip isn't. It was funny. When I first started the book, I was unsure of whether or not they wanted personal experience in it, right? So I did several chapters with the travel logs in it. And I'm going to write all those travel logs for the ones that I didn't, because I'm hoping that the stories will drive people to the website, and then they can get what happened when we actually went there, because that's not in there. But when it was, you take some place like Brooksville or any number of the places we've been to, and there's no moment, right? Or it's one moment and it's passing, and you have all this front story, right? So if we didn't see the ship coming out of the water in the singing river, would that have made that story any less of a good ghost story? And yet there's really nothing scary about that until you get to that moment. And it's like I said in Tim Weisberg's book, it's like trying to hold on to mist. Like, that moment could have been anything. And so now I'm putting significance on an event that may or may not have made any sense or could have been completely natural, but people are, they're drooling for that. They want that. And that's really hard, because as I'm going through, I feel the need to be scarier, right? And I think, and here's where, if you do this and do it well, you're an ace and you're better than me. You can be suspenseful. I find it difficult to be scary without being sentimental, right? Sentimentality. Remember, Sybil Johnston, first lesson, creative writing, like, kill all sentimentality in your work, in your writing, unless you are using it to do something, like using it to mess with the audience or something. So don't talk about death in a poetic way. Don't talk about love in a poetic way. Don't talk, and it's really hard to do. I don't even know if you would call it sentimentality. It's really hard to do a scary story without it being a cliche. And so what you end up doing is you end up falling back on these very traditional. I'm having a hard time positioning myself tonight. You fall back on these very traditional, almost cliche aspects of it. It's like I found this writing the book, and I find it now preparing for what I'm going to be speaking about. I find myself saying the same things over and over again. You know why? Because the backstories of these things are somewhat unique, and individualized to the towns that they might be in. There you go. Now see them. Now I'm better, and you can see the jack-o'-lantern already out and everything like that. But the activity isn't, right? Like, a ghost is a ghost. A ghost is intense because of the way that you experience it, and because it's you experiencing it. Oftentimes, most times, the actual haunting is the same, right? And it's the same because maybe that's our expectation for what a ghost is, right? And maybe because there's a very limited amount of things that a ghost might be able to do, right? And so it's where do you go after lights are seen or things are moved? Or where do you go after she appears in the road and you run through her? And at that point, and maybe it's my own oversaturation with this stuff, but it seems like the stories are over and over and over and over again. Same thing. And how do you make that fresh as a storyteller, right? So to me, that's why the backstory is always really compelling. Because the backstory can tell something, it is usually involved, and you can bring in, you know, parts of the history of the town, and that's what I love to do. But the hauntings themselves are the same old, you know? And that's one of the reasons why I didn't go to Arcadia tonight, because I was like, well, I've done that. Like, I've heard Mary talk. You're not going to stay late enough to potentially see the little kids. Would I like to see little kids running around a cemetery and disappearing on headstones? Yes, but like, I've seen and experienced the quiet voidness of the. So why would I go there again? You know, and I was going to go there because the people I was with are going to be going with. Their approach is very much scientific and very much equipment and tech based. And we had such a great time at Indian Springs that it was like, oh, I would love to be able to hear Mary talk, you know, or, you know, it's really Elizabeth, and get it on like a ghost box. Like, I think that would be really interesting. But in terms of like, I've done that, you know, I've done that place, you know, so many of these places people ask me to go back there and I'm like, but I've done that. And so I'm having a really hard time re-experiencing that because, you know, it doesn't become any more interesting the more and more you do it, right? So, sorry, distracted there for a moment. How do I present that to the people then, right? Because they want the ghost story. They want it to be like, and like bleeding walls and things like that. And I don't have that for them, right? As I continue, like we're kind of into the second part of what we're doing now. As I talk, if you are a fan of the show, if you've heard episodes, which stories do you think I should include? And we have a whole episode called, I think, Greatest Hits, where we talk about what we're going to do for the show, for the presentation I did last year. So if you're new to the show or you're just getting into the episodes, or if you've been following along or just hearing me talk about them, which legend trips should I include? Which is why I don't want to do Ybor City. Like, I haven't been there. I've never been there in my life. I haven't done that. So it would just be me rehashing whatever's out there on the internet, right? And I might as well just be writing a book for Schiffer if I do that. So what do you guys think that I should include in it? And of course, if you're in the chat room, you can feel free to write that. But if you're not in the chat room, you can feel free to message me or email me what you think would be really good for this year's presentation. As I kind of shift, and I'll drink my coffee. Yes, I am with Robert tonight. When you hear a ghost story, when you're going to a presentation like this, what are your expectations for it? And of course, we probably have people here that are slanted towards the things that I do by the mere fact that you're watching my show, or by the mere fact that you are, to some degree, in the paranormal world. And so things like the history of a location and the backstory are interesting to you. But when you go to see someone speak, when you go to see, to an event and you know that there's going to be speakers there, they're doing Mass Paracon right now, I think. What do you want to get from them? Do you want to get a lesson in something, or do you want to get a ghost story? Do you want to get freaked out? Now, I know I pretty much have all the stories because I'm only going to 2 or 3 different new ones that I've done before. I know I've got everything to work with, right? But I'm feeling this pressure this year to be scary. I know how to do that, right? I know how to hit the right buttons. Back in the day, back in the Mass Paranormal Crossroads day, I found out really early on, I did a write-up of the case. I want to say it was in Warren, Massachusetts, or the guy's name was Warren, but I think it was like something French. That was one of the first cases that the Warrens were involved in. And what I noticed that page got hit all the time. right? And not only that, but people who were hitting it they did it because they were freaking out, because they were keywording the Warrens, right? Like, we all know how keywording works. We all know how Google works, right? And I know that I posted something about Puckwudgies last week, right? I posted something about Puckwudgies. I shared it with the same people I always share, and I had 800 times more web hits over the next 2 days. So I know that there are sweet spots. I know that there are things that people want to hear. They want to get it. They love the Warrens, right? Anything you do with the Warren, you put it out there, you're going to get like responses to it. Puckwudgies are going to get any kind of response to it. If I talk about Robert the Doll, right? And I think that's frustrating too, because I'll be like, oh my word, listen to this amazing backstory and this great history lesson and this really interesting haunting that's going on at the Key West. At the Key West Lighthouse, and people go, Key West, that's about Robert. Have you seen Robert? Can we talk about Robert? Da-da-da. And so you're like, well, wait a minute, that's not what I was talking about. That's not what I'm here for. I'm here about this other thing. And so there's a lot of expectations that go into it. And I think part of what that does is that stifles the ghost story itself, because ghost stories take many forms. One of the responses that I remember us getting from Haunted Objects, to book Haunted Objects, was that it wasn't scary enough. And I look back and I know that there are some stories that are freaky in there, right? And I know that there are 2 or 3 that, to me, even when I think about them, are scary as hell. If you've never read the story about the file cabinet, you need to read the story about the file cabinet, because that was one of the... I don't get creeped out hearing other people's ghost stories much when I've experienced them, but that was insane. But the other parts of those stories are these little moments of freakiness, of creepiness, and then, because of the nature of Haunted Objects, something inspirational, right? So take, for example, the chain, I believe it was Saint Raphael, the angel Raphael, I should say, and the pennant. And if you don't know the story, if you haven't read Haunted Objects, don't try to go out and buy a copy, because there's no copies out there to buy, except for me. The story pretty much goes that this woman lost her father, and he had given her a medal. And she gave the medal to her son, and unfortunately her son died. And this medal would disappear for long periods of time, and then she would go to the grave of her father, and the pennant would be on his grave. And then she would find it in the boy's room, and then she would find it in something. She would be looking for something, and she'd find a picture of her father, and it would be hanging over it. And it was this idea that those 2 spirits had found each other in the afterlife. And those 2 spirits were communicating to her when she needed it most. So in times when she was most down, these ghosts, whether they were angels, which is what she believed, or whether they were the ghosts of her son and her father, they were communicating with her to tell her that things were going to be okay. The story that I've shared, if you watched the Christmas episode, the story that I shared about the woman whose brother left a message on the answer machine after he had died, telling her where the presents were for her son. That has a certain amount of creep factor, right? But that's not the emotion that works on. The emotion that works on is like that, like that gives me faith in something. That gives me a belief in something. That's inspirational. That's not scary, right? And what happens is that if we insist on ghost stories being a certain way, it pushes out those inspirational ones. And this is something that I've seen happen with a lot of ghostly topics. Puckwudgies are a great example of something that is creepy and maybe legend, and people have had their experiences. Hope is a really good word, Colleen. Yes, thanks. But because of a need, because of a desire to make them more fantabulous, more fantastic, more insane, better marketing, one might say, for them, they've now become these vicious monsters with claws and drooling, and like they're gonna come get your children and eat your mom and all this other. And that's not what the stories are. That's not what the legends are. So then I'm confronted with people who say, I'm scared of this, I'm scared of that. This is happening. What's gonna happen? Are they gonna eat my dogs? And I'm like, what are you talking? Like, there's no dog eating. Like, it's because the audience has, because of their desire for terror in their ghost stories, has shifted the narrative. And I think what happens is we have become more scared of ghosts than other cultures because of that. So most cultures, to generalize, have some relationship with their ghosts, some relationship with their dead, going back thousands of years. Other cultures have a respect for those who have passed. They call upon their ancestral spirits. There is respect for that. Even the Day of the Dead is about connecting, right? Very first book, we've talked about communicating with spirits. Talks about making plates and leaving them out for the ghosts of family members so that you can use them to do bad things to people you don't like. But the first part of that, which is a positive thing, is connecting to people who have passed. And we want that, oddly enough, because we do talk to our dead, right? We do talk respectfully to those dead who we know, right? We ask our grandfathers for guidance in something, or we, take time out to remember our mom and feel like we're speaking with her, that she's there with us, and it's inspirational. But then there's this scariness that has to come over. And yes, Halloween is scary. Yes, Halloween should be scary. But ghosts aren't necessarily scary. To the point that both of these things have now become true with people that I talk to. One, automatically, if something weird or paranormal is happening, you're scared by it. And the first question I always ask when someone is experiencing something, and this happened to me about 2 weeks ago, are you scared because it's not supposed to be happening, or are you scared because you're intimidated? And almost never, threatened, I should say, not intimidated, almost never is the response, I felt threatened, or I was intimidated, or I felt like I was in danger. It always is, it scared me because it's not supposed to happen. But people automatically now have that reaction, which means if that's your reaction, you're automatically going to be closed off to having a paranormal experience because you don't want to be scared, right? Like, you don't mind going to see a horror movie. You don't mind going to see it. You don't mind going to see, but you don't want it in your house. You don't want it in your living room. You don't want to see a ghost sitting on your couch because you've been trained, because of the paranormal audience, because of the ghostly audience, you've been trained to fear that automatically. So think about that. You want to talk to your grandfather, but what would you do if your grandfather showed up? Would you be scared of him? You might be, because you've been convinced, and you've been talking about those expectations that you have, that there is something to fear in the paranormal. And the other part of this is, so that's the one part. The other part is, because those moments that are scariest become more popular, that's what you're going to see on TV. And that is what you're going to see when you go, or when you reopen a book, right? So now everything has to be, because, and you don't recognize a ghost unless it does those things. So now you're forcing, the audience forces us to have to make things scarier. And then the whole thing cycles through, right? So, people say to me, oh, I heard that episode, or they email me and they say, where was that location? Because we totally want to go get scared. And I'm like, was anything in the episode scary? You know what I'm saying? Like, even, I talked about Arbuckle Bridge. Even in Arbuckle Bridge, it wasn't scary. It was more of like the sense of awe of what was going on. I tell the story of the Hullies when we talk about Stetson, right? And there's no way to tell that story now without throwing in the whole vision, the whole moment where we felt there were people going to class, or that the courtyard was, there were people in the courtyard, not the Hullies, but other people. But that's not the Hully story, right? And the Hully story is this amazing, uplifting story of love, of finding the person who you were always supposed to be with after you've died, right? And then you guys being able to be together and enjoy moments together for eternity. Cheesy sounding, maybe, but that's what that story is, right? But people want to go, no, no, go back to that, go back to that. And the same thing for Fort DeSoto, right? So people, I will say, and maybe it's me baiting them, no pun intended. Maybe it's me baiting them, but we talk about, and I talk about the fact that it was like the episode that almost ruined the show, right? And then I talk about the idea of this mother who is still walking the ruins of this site looking for her children and crying and weeping. And that should be enough. I'm not sure how scary that is, but then the audience wants to hear the audio. The audience wants to hear the EVP, to the point that they'll stay after the show. And I'll say, you know what? I'm going to do it, and then I'll play it for you because I really can't get things on. And they'll stay. They'll stay a half hour afterwards to hear 2 moments of an audio clip so that they can be freaked out by it. And they are freaked out by it. They like it because it's scary. They don't like it because it's uplifting. They don't like it because it's a snapshot of sorrow. They like it because it's freaky. Oh my God, that's a dead person talking. And I'm victim to that too, right? Like, you know, it's interesting because you could say that old episodes of Tripping on Legends are essentially me telling a ghost story to Natalie to a point where I want to get her excited and sparked up to go out and do it, right? So, I mean, by the very nature of telling the ghost story, telling the legend, I'm trying to get her to be creeped out about it enough, and to some degree not creeped out enough to actually go out there and do it, right? Like those were the old episodes, and I would be guilty of that as well. So the really hard thing is to do this and not give in to that, right? And yet that's what the people want. So would you be disappointed if you went to a ghost presentation and the ghost presentation wasn't scary? If the ghost presentation was, here are the legends, here's the history, here's what it might mean, here's what I experienced there, which is almost always nothing or nothing tangible, would that be enough for you? Because we are dealing with people who have passed, in theory. We are dealing with the expectations of it's not an abstract thing, right? And this is the other part of it, right? We're not dealing with demons. We're not dealing with elementals most of the time, that kind of stuff, right? We're dealing with potentially human spirits that are there. Side note, right? Because of this whole factor, now everything has to be ratcheted up. So everything has to be demons. People who are in the paranormal field are like, it's hilarious that people want I think everything's demons. And yet that's what sells, right? And so that influences you as well. Even as an investigator, even someone in the paranormal community, you're influenced by the TV shows. And if you don't think you are, just by the mere fact that you have to talk to people who watch them, and those are the people who are calling you, like, you're influenced by them. This is what I struggle with. I struggle with this idea that, yes, like my Ocala stuff, there's a dark force that's there, and I long to understand what that dark force is, because it's been something I've come up against in Freetown, something that I've come up against in Brooksville, I think. There it is, right? Like, but so many of these stories are not that way. I almost feel like a liar if I make them creepier or scarier than they need to be. But that's what the audience wants, right? And so I now have to go back and say, rather than say which of these legends is the most interesting, which legends can we get the most out of, I now have to say which are going to be the scariest. Not which are the most interesting, but which are the scariest. You know, if you, because I'm just like running through my head because I have these lists of stories. Here are the ones that I've done before in a presentation. Here are the ones that I want to hold off on because I want them to be part of the book tour for the Haunted Love. And then here's the ones that I haven't explored yet. I haven't, like, how can I make this scarier? Because you got to give the audience a little bit of what they want. And the fact of the matter is sometimes it's just not. Sometimes it's just awe-inspiring. Sometimes it's just a moment of pause. So I would love to hear you guys' thoughts on this. I would love to get your response to whether it's a speaker that you saw that talked about ghosts and was more profound than creepy or more profound than scary, and that influenced you and you're like, hey, wow, I really enjoyed that. Whether it's, no, Chris, like, it's supposed to be fun. It's supposed to be, and you make it fun by creeping them out. The Palmetto one's really messing me up because they want ghost stories that I can tell to kids, and then they leave the library and they go and trick or treat and they're freaked out by every corner that's it. That one, all right, I'm gonna like amp it up a little bit. I'm gonna make these stories a little bit more twisted. Before I go, one more thing I want to talk about really quickly, which is this. And I would love to get feedback from both my audience right now and the people in the chat room, and then by anyone else who wants to communicate. Do you want to get some of these events via like Facebook Live? Do you want me to tape it? Like, I think we did one of them like a few years ago, Southwest Florida ghosts. When I was specifically talking about just ones that were in this area conference we did. I think it was Naples, one of the Naples libraries. Do you want episodes? Do you want to hear these presentations? Especially, I would love to, if I can do the one in Melbourne, which is going to be a panel. I would love to do that one live. But do you want to hear these presentations? Do you want to like actually hear these stories again? Now, for some of you guys, it's going to be like, I've heard that story already. But of course, it's about the interaction and how I tell it to a live audience. You know, the one in East Lake is very Pinellas County, so it's going to be all those stories. Do you guys want me to post those, like to tape them, to post them as episodes, either audio or video? Try to go Facebook Live with them. I would love to get your response to that. Colleen, you would say yes to anything that I said. But anyone else, let me know, get back to me. And of course, you can do that in any of our platforms. So of course, Facebook is our, I keep calling it our dumping ground. I feel like I'm talking about Freetown. It's our dumping ground. So that's facebook.com/trippingonlegends. The website proper, which I just changed. So I would love for you guys to get back to me about the new look of the website, is trippingonlegends.wordpress.com. Stop pounding, Colleen. The Twitter, as always, is Spooky Balzano. spookytripping@gmail.com is how to get in touch with me via email. And then, of course, Spooky Tripping is also the Instagram as well. So get in touch with me on any of those platforms. I'm going to be sharing, probably when I get off tonight, I'm going to be sharing all the events that I have under my personal Facebook account. I'm going to be shifting them all to Tripping on Legends as well. So if you are in Florida, I am going to be everywhere from Naples to Gainesville to Leesburg. I mean, like, I'm going to be all over the state, East Coast, West Coast, central to a little bit north to south. You can catch me somewhere. I would love for you guys to stop in. I would love for you guys to see one of the events and tell me what you think about it. So for Christopher Balzano, here's hoping that all your trips are legendary. Have a wonderful evening. Good night.